Okay, do you hear me on the speakers now?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Very cool. Very professional.
We do what we can.
The background pictures is also event last year.
What?
The background pictures.
Almost, yeah. That's a Psytrance rave in Switzerland, outdoor. We need to have a social life. I don't have both pictures, so my neck will be quite fucked after this session. Okay, should we start?
You can come over to this. Okay.
Better?
You can come over here.
No, I think I shouldn't because of the camera. No, we take that for a reason. You will get why later, I guess. I won't comment that.
But don't ask silly questions.
Okay. Ah yeah, water. I need that, otherwise it gets bad. Okay, welcome to my session. A perspective for the US and ECS community, I call it. I did the first part of this session we will see now already at Developers Workshop in Dresden about half a year ago. I think most of you know me here. My name is Adrian Schwend. I'm the founder and webmaster of netlabs.org. We provide software. Outline about the first part looks like this. This is mainly for those who downloaded it. Everything is linked here. This is the outline for the second part. So, just really quickly about NetLabs. For those who don't know me yet, I still meet people who never heard of NetLabs. I was at Systems Fair in Munich this year, and one guy came by and OS2, I used that, but NetLabs never heard of. So we provide open source software since 1997. I actually started to do that because I was using OS2 back at this time already, and my cousin actually started to use Linux, and I got into the open source scene like this quite soon, and I was always sure that we should provide something like that on OS2 as well. Quite a lot changed in the meanwhile. IBM doesn't support it anymore. We provide more and more. Most of the stuff nowadays released is done by third parties. IBM doesn't do much anymore. For me, NetLabs was for quite a long time just a dream. Back at this time I didn't have internet yet at home, so actually 2 weeks after I got internet back then, dial-up connection, I started NetLabs, I registered the domain name, and I've set up all the stuff. So it was a dream for me. It actually worked pretty well, more or less, but people seem to like it. A little bit about the community. I saved all people in the database which are working for NetLabs or did work for NetLabs since 1997. Meanwhile, I have about 100 registered people in there. Those people are mostly developers. There are just a few users in there. Around half of them is still active, which means the email address still works and they do contribute in some form. There are also quite a lot who change to Linux, BSD, Mac OS X, whatever. The users in there are mainly people who administrate some of the websites. It's a little bit a pity that we don't have more people who contribute, but shit, that's me. But it's also my fault because it's not that easy to administrate the web stuff. That will hopefully change soon, more about that later. Community meets on a regular basis. We do have an IRC channel. The hardcore team of the developer meets there. For sure this is not possible for everyone. Not everyone can go online on IRC during the day. I'm in the position that I can do that also because I work at the university. We do meet on other occasions as well. For example, we had the developer workshop this year, which was an excellent event for us actually. I don't want to offend you, but it's really important for developers that we can sit together without annoying questions as well. So we really appreciated it, I guess, and we will do that again in the future. A small core team also meets once a year in France or in Switzerland so far, once a year in February, March, to do a so-called winter camp. We go snowboarding a week. We talk about stuff, OS2 stuff, ecom station stuff, but we do also a lot non-related tasks to computer in that week. One thing is for sure, the community keeps us together. I have to be honest, this is actually the only reason why I still do NetLabs. If I would do it from a realistic point of view, I should have stopped that long ago. That's a fact. So, actually I'm still surprised that I'm still using OS2. The past few years I had to work a lot with Linux, with BSD, with whatever system. Actually I do like them for web servers, for stuff like this. But with every desktop I tried, with every distro I tried, I always start my OS2 setup again, my dual boot here. OS2 is used, or ecom station is used most of the time, simply because no of the other platforms provides what I want. So why do we like that stuff? Or, okay, first the problems. What problems do we face nowadays? One of the main problems in the future is that we won't have 64-bit support. This is completely impossible, period. We will not be able to update the stuff ourselves. IBM definitely won't give us the source code, so no chance to do that. The OS2 kernel itself will not be able to address more than 4 GB of memory. A Russian guy recently provided a patch that applications can do that. This is useful for very special needs, but the kernel itself is not able to do that. We also slowly run into design problems of the kernel. I mean, this code is not really state-of-the-art anymore. It used to be 15, 20 years ago. But slowly, things change. Even Windows gets better from the design. We have to admit that. So we lag behind the history. The kernel is really performant. That's a good thing, but it won't change anymore. Scott actually once told me, I just touch the stuff I really have to touch, and all the rest I won't touch, because never touch a running system. So if you don't touch it, you don't break it. Another issue is that we don't really have native UTF-8 support in the PM. We do have DCBS, DBCS. Bart can tell histories about that, I guess. This morning Yuri presented the way to handle that, but it's absolutely impossible to replace all that stuff in PM. That would be an enormous patchwork actually. PM bugs will stay forever. Implementation of new stuff is difficult or impossible. Just one little thing, we talked about shaped windows at the QT session. This simply can't be implemented in PM. We cannot change that part of the system. And an issue that really starts to get the problem as well, we don't have a real security or multi-user module. We do have security/2, but the system itself was not designed with that in mind. Actually, it was designed as a single user module. Even if we can patch that up to a certain point, we cannot fix that really properly on every level. The #1 problem, I guess, writing device drivers still takes a lot of time and leads to no end. We do have some nice things, we will have a look at that, GenMac, Unio, stuff like this, but we still invest way too much time into getting device drivers. In my opinion, no operating system should be forced to do that. I also don't like the Linux approach there. This is stuff that needs to be available by the vendors, in my opinion. I mean, after all, we just work with the stuff. We don't give a shit about the device driver itself. So why should we spend half a year getting a car to work? Problems the human layer. Most of us, fortunately, do have a real life.
What?
I talk about the Knut. I talk about the developers here. I mean, every one of us has a job. Every one of us does like to do some other things besides computers. You saw the Cytrons picture. I do meet friends, I invent friends, and I really need that to be motivated to do NetLab stuff as well. For sure, this leads to the fact that spare time is precious. We can't invest the whole day into NetLabs, even if I would like to do that. Most of us are no longer students. It's simply a fact that you have time during your studies. That's a common problem. That's not just a NetLabs problem. Every open source project faces that trouble. You really often see that once the people are in the real world, they cannot invest or they don't want to invest that time anymore into open source or spare time projects. One thing I really have to say, the user feedback and support is often rather depressing. I have no clue why, but for some reason it seems to be difficult to give feedback on issues, to help out on things if we ask to test something. It's really rarely that people are really giving bug reports in a good way. So that's not so motivating for us developers. I know several people who told me I have no clue if I should invest more time into that because I got maybe 3 emails with feedback. So are just those 3 people using it, then I won't do it anymore. Some OS2 users are very stubborn, also known as annoying. I'm really sorry to say that, but some people really are a bit out of this world. If you check the OS2 news groups, if you check some mailing lists, I really wonder what these people think. They just piss off developers. I know a lot of developers who don't read the OS2 news groups anymore because of a famous guy. I think if you do a bit of Googling, you know who. I absolutely have no clue about the motivation of this guy. We have all kind of conspiracy theories about him. I have no clue about the motivation of people like this, but I know that it's that annoying and that people got pissed by such discussions. One example, maybe he is still contributing a lot of stuff, but Chris Wolgemuth, he stopped releasing his multimedia classes to the public because some people ongoingly told that those classes are trapping the system, which is technically simply not possible. They made it so long that Christian got pissed by them and said, I will not release that stuff to the public anymore.
Which is sad.
Yeah, definitely, which is really sad. One main issue for us, our community does not grow. I have to say that on every event I'm surprised by the people we see here. There are always new people, faces I never saw before, even not in IRC or whatever. But we do not really grow in a way we should to keep on a whole operating system, applications and everything. That's simply a fact. Most things are done by the same few people. I think every developer knows the other one. As I said, from time to time new people appear like Doodle. Where are you? Yeah, exactly. This is really something I really appreciate. This is also something that really motivates me, but unfortunately it doesn't happen that often.
The OS2 users are dying now.
Yeah, that's also a fact. So one can make jokes about that, but people are dying around us.
Especially the OS2 users.
Yeah, especially in the USA, I think.
Yeah, you have to go to Warpstock in the US.
Yeah.
You see why.
In Europe, for some reason in Europe the whole issue is a bit different. There are a lot of old school OS2 users, but for some strange reason there are still new people in here, which is really cool for me, but also a bit surprising. So, just bad news? For sure not. There is always hope. We have quite a nice crowd here. I was already surprised yesterday for a Friday. In my opinion, we had really a lot of people here. I saw a lot of cool presentations already. I had a lot of cool talks. It was the same at Developers Workshop half a year ago. I'm sure it will be the same in half a year at my place. It's really motivating to meet the people, to get feedback, to talk to them, to talk about new ideas. This is really cool. Another thing is that we are definitely not the only one facing those problems. All open source projects do have the same problems as we have. So OpenOffice, Mozilla, whatever you know, the main projects have just a few coders who do a lot of work, and the rest really depends on, I don't know, random things. It's simply a fact that all open source projects have about the same problems. Another thing I discovered recently, I was quite surprised about that, the OpenBSD core team is just around 60 people. For sure those people are really well organized. They have a really strict way how to release stuff. If I remember correctly, they do releases about every half year. They have a good organization. I think this is really vital to a community like ours. If you are not a lot of people, it's really important that you organize yourself really well. There are still people and companies using OS2 and Ecom Station. You are part of it, I guess, so that's also a reason to push it further. And there are many good ideas what could be done. A few months ago, I guess, I started the wiki at wiki.netlabs.org, a community page where everyone can contribute, and I'm really surprised about the ideas in there. There are some really cool concepts and proposals for new things in this wiki. So we are not at the end yet, we can do a lot of cool features in the future. And as I said, even if I do use GNOME and Linux and BSD, I always get back to our good old PM and WPS because they are still unique in many ways. So OS2 was really ahead in the 90s. Some concepts are, as I said, still unique, and some parts are definitely out of date and should be kicked. Let's have a look at the stuff we like. This is really my list now. You will for sure have your own preferences. What I like is the WPS. This is really the main thing for me. It's a unique concept, a great idea actually. We can talk about the implementation. There are rumors that this was basically a prototype and customers liked it, so IBM didn't kill it. I have no clue if this is true, but it's definitely a fact that the WPS was not written by many people. But still, excellent idea. Even if GNOME claims to have a similar approach, it's nowhere near the features and power of WPS. This is simply a fact. The object-oriented desktop, subplotting things you want to extend instead of ugly hooks, this is really a cool concept. Again, I was at Systems, I showed the WPS concept to KDE and GNOME developers, and they were really like, cool, we can have plugins in KDE Control Center as well. And then I said, well, A, you can do this in the whole system, and B, we are not talking about plugins, we're talking about subclassing. They were really, really impressed. And when you tell them that you work like this for 13 years or something, they don't understand why. So the concept still impressed people, that's definitely a fact. And the PM is definitely a beast of a graphical user interface engine, but a powerful one. The GPI is a vector-based matrix backend. Is Peter here? Yeah, talk to Peter. 1 year ago he told me, whatever you do, don't take away my GPI.
He said that like 1 hour ago as well.
Okay. So this was really, or this is really something we should keep in mind. The GPI is powerful. It's damn complex. A lot of people told me you hardly can understand how it works, but you can do a lot of things if you know how it works. MMPM, love it or hate it, but the concept of abstracting codecs from the desktop is actually quite cool and quite unique. I mean, in theory, a player shouldn't worry about the codecs, the system should do that. Chris Wolgemuth's classes again, they implement that in a really cool way. Also, if you show that to Linux people, they are really impressed. Unfortunately, the support for that nowadays for recent codecs is not as I would like to see it. The kernel doesn't break everything with a new release. this is really the #1 pain in the ass of Linux, in my opinion. Each time you have a binary driver or something, or you compile something with a binary module, each time you do an update, which happens about every 2 weeks on Linux, it will break the stuff you compiled. So every device driver needs to be recompiled. That's not the way to go, in my opinion. Another thing is that it's damn good multitasking. I remember many PM logs when I was playing sound. The sound played on for forever. Just the PM was locked. It's not really nice, but it's cool like that. The Rec6 scripting interface is really a cool thing. The common user access guidelines. Check that once on KDE or GNOME applications, you get really sick. Linux people always think they know the best way how a user interface should look like. This is not the way to go either, in my opinion, because every application has a different thing. Even if those projects try to have some standard, just a really few developers implement it actually that way. Also, drag and drop and the right mouse button, right in terms of right. This is really the only operating system who got that correct, in my opinion. The performance is definitely a thing I like. I have 1 GB of memory in here. Unlike Linux, I barely use more than 500 megs. It's quite fast on slow machines as well. This is impressive. The NetLabs org community rocks with all ups and downs. I really like the people. I like to see them on a regular basis. What do you like? I'm sure you have your own. I would like to have a discussion a bit later. Maybe just...
Well, first of all, I wanted to mention that in terms of codecs, you was 2 folks from Japan. They have a whole bunch of multimedia codecs for OS2 that also address a lot of different file formats. And the other thing I also wanted to mention, I've been running OS2 for almost a decade, and I haven't had a single virus or worm on my system. And I also don't have to worry about things like hidden root keys that, for example, under Windows allow companies like Sony to install monitoring software on your box, and you're not even able to see that it's there.
I agree about that, but we have to be honest. By design, OS2 would be completely lost if the user base would be bigger. We have absolutely no security concepts in OS2.
Well, but whatever is installed in the system, I can see it in the config.sys. While with the windows.ini files, or not actually .ini, with the that files, with the registry, with the hidden root keys, you can install, and Sony is doing that with their players.
I agree, but if you know how to hide the stuff on OS2, you can do it very well. I know people who did some nice hacks like this, believe me that. Our benefit in that regard is really that we are too small to be attractive for virus swarms. But if we would have more people using it, we would face similar problems actually. As I said, I would like to go on and have the discussion more at the end. Things to avoid. There were a lot of discussions the past years about having parts of or all parts of OS2 open source by IBM, about rewriting PM, rewriting GPI, rewriting the kernel. In my opinion, it doesn't make sense to have OS2 completely open source. Why? It's simply too late for that. We could have argued about that maybe 5 up to 10 years ago. Then we would have said, okay, we are quite still up to date. It does make sense to push that further. But technology changed too radically to do exactly something like OS2 again. There are so many open source operating systems out there, it simply doesn't make sense. A rewrite of the kernel, I mean, rewrite in terms of we rewrite exactly that kernel from scratch, doesn't make sense either. That wouldn't solve any of the problems we face nowadays. Just as a side note, at the moment the way to go is definitely Ecom Station. Why? It's simply as easy as never before to use OS2. I mean, if I remember the 10 years ago when I installed OS2, it took quite a while to get that stuff to work. With Ecom Station, you get about everything in one package. You have a lot of good device drivers IBM never shipped with. You have a lot of applications shipped with, and so on. Ecom Station really motivated me to go on as well. Without that, I would have my issues. I mean, imagine we would still have to work on Warp 4 level with all the patches as we did for years. That was no fun. So, do me the favor, support Ecom Station as good as you can at the moment. This will bring us further in the future as well. Okay, now about the dreams. We talked about the things we like. Now let's think about how we could keep them alive. One option, which is quite obvious actually, is get PM and WPS to work on a POSIX kernel or something like that. I mean POSIX kernels, I mean Linux, Darwin, BSD, whatever, simply a kernel that exists nowadays. Main problem here, we would need PM source code from IBM. We did have talks with IBM so far, and all I can say so far is that I absolutely don't count on that at all. I have my reasons for it, so it's nice to dream about it, but I seriously doubt we will get there. Another thing, implement parts of PM in OpenGL or something like that. There's a project called FreePM. I'm not sure if this really makes sense nowadays, so we'll talk about that later. Another option is implement something like the WPS on top of something existing. Top of something existing mainly means the toolkit. Why? As a developer nowadays, you don't code PM anymore. Like people don't code X anymore, Xlib. Who does? You have to code on X?
No.
Or PM?
Yes.
Yeah. The OS2 people are doing it because most of them don't know another toolkit. We saw a really nice Qt presentation by Dimitri now today, but believe me, new people won't get into PM. They get scared away because every toolkit they learned, every Java user interface they learned is way easier to implement. It's simply too much work. No one will do that except skilled people who still know the concepts. No one codes directly on Windows anymore nowadays. Everyone is using a toolkit. That's simply a fact. So we could think about doing the WPS concept on an existing toolkit. More about that later. Another option, and many people actually ask me why don't you do that, mainly Linux people. We could move to an existing platform, GNOME or KDE. I definitely won't do that. If people would decide to go that way, I would probably quit, because I don't see any motivation to do that. Kernel. There are many other options about kernel, and I said the last thing we want to do is to write a brand new kernel. The world definitely doesn't need that, period. There are some quite nice concepts out there. The really trendy one at the moment is definitely Linux. The pro is that there is quite good hardware support, even if I got really mad spending half a day to get the stupid Bluetooth to work. You can get it to work if you are patient or if you use a distribution which spends a lot of time in getting a universal kernel to work. And after all, this is the main work of a distribution, I guess, which is a bit a stupid concept. But that's Linux, that's the design. Take it or leave it. I use it, but I don't really like it. BSD, I really use that a lot on servers. It's really stable, it's easy to use, it's a bit less clumsy than Linux. You don't have to recompile new versions all day, just once a year or so. The license is a bit more open, or not just a bit, it's extremely open. GPL is really restrictive if it comes to binary-only stuff. Some of you might have followed the discussion on Linux mailing lists if they want to provide a binary interface for device drivers or not. People can kill for this discussion, I tell you. This gets really ugly. BSD doesn't really care about that. They say, do whatever you want with this code as long as you mention that you use code from us. That's the other extreme. The contra is that most BSD kernels, NetBSD, FreeBSD, OpenBSD, they are quite monolithic in the design. the stuff is actually quite old. The code base is not really modern as well. And I talked to a guy who implemented NetBSD on a non-existing kernel, non-existing platform up to that point. He told me that he spent about 2 years getting into the source code, trying to understand how it works, until he was at the point where he could implement that stuff. So it's not really easy to get into that code. Another option that started to appear about 5-6 years ago, can't even remember, is Darwin. This is actually the kernel of macOS 10, and most people don't know that this kernel is open source. Apple is releasing that source code on a regular basis to the public under the Apple public license, and they support that quite well so far. There is a group of people around the Open Darwin project. They try to keep the open source kernel up and running. And as you might know, Apple recently decided to move to the Intel platform. At first I was really disappointed because I thought it's a bit sad for the PowerPC, but then I realized that this opens a new approach now. You might know that people got macOS 10 desktop to work on non-Mac Intel hardware. What did they do? They took Open Darwin, they took the proprietary code base from Apple, and they implemented it on top of Open Darwin. I was absolutely sure that this will happen when they announce that they will release migrate stuff to Intel, because it is possible and hackers are tempted to do stuff like this. So another thing is that the kernel design of macOS 10 is, unlike other people are told, it's not based on BSD. It provides a BSD subsystem, but actually the thing is built on the Mach kernel. And as some of you might know, Mach was the kernel taken by IBM for the OS2 for PowerPC design. If you have the Red Book, check out the Darwin documentation. You will find some things that sound very familiar from concept. Contra of Darwin, the hardware support in Intel is rather low at the moment. I am pretty sure that this will change with macOS on Intel, even if they restrict the stuff to their boxes. I talked to one of the Open Darwin coders. He told me that it is possible to use any of the low-level macOS 10 drivers on Open Darwin. This will not work for the graphic drivers as far as I know, because this is hooked with the closed source Quartz engine, but this will work for FireWire, for USB, stuff like this. So that's quite tempting. Another thing is ReactOS. People talked about that because it's a bit the anti-design, and as we know, OS2 and Windows are not that different because the same companies used to work on it. That was an option I heard as well, and for sure we could have a look at another microkernel. We had a little insight about K42 this morning. Will this be again, this session? Tomorrow, okay, so if you missed that, you can have a look at that. Drawback of this solution for me right now, it's a research project, and to be honest, I don't really feel like taking a kernel that is nowhere at the moment. We faced with that problem for quite some time, and I get a bit tired of it. What would I expect from a project to really keep me going on in the future? I want applications that are well integrated into the desktop. My favorite example is really CD Record from Chris Wohlgemuth. It is using an existing Unix port as backend, CD Record, and it implements drag and drop features, stuff we know in OS2 in an absolutely obvious way for OS2 users. Another example, Bart and I this summer discussed how we could implement Samba administration on OS2, and after a few whiskeys we had quite a cool idea how this should be done. It's simply the OS2 way, drag and drop, objects, and so on. It absolutely makes sense to implement stuff like this. I also don't like the approach of projects like KDE or GNOME. They rewrite every crap. They think they have to have their own browser, They think they have to rewrite a complete office suite. They think they have to rewrite a mail client. This doesn't make sense in my opinion. We should focus on integrating OpenOffice into a desktop, integrating Thunderbird and Firefox into a desktop, add drag and drop support to that. This is time well invested, not implementing yet another mail client and stuff like this. For sure we should keep track of CUA guidelines. By the way, Apple is using CUA as base for their own guidelines. Someone this morning told me actually what they did is they took the IBM stuff and rewrote it for one mouse button, which is a really stupid idea. But
Don't talk with the Apple folks about the number of their mouse.
Yeah, that's a religious question for Apple people. One thing which is really sure for me, UTF or Unicode as default, whatever we do, we really have to focus on new markets like East Europe, like Asia, and the only way to go is Unicode and UTF-8. Everything else would be plain stupid nowadays. Localization is also extremely important. Bart is working on Ecom Station Taiwanese edition, right? And me too. It's almost ready. It will probably release pretty soon, I hope. This is really the way to go. The European market, the Central Europe market, and the US market, they are really saturated, in my opinion. If we want to have a chance with anything in the future, we should clearly focus on the big countries out there. And after all, we are really not big here if we compare Europe with China, Asia, and so on. So for me, it's really important that we have good translations, not the funny translations I saw in Linux sometimes, like I will think about it, that's really a good one. So that's, for a niche market, that's really an important thing because you can get attention like this in new interesting markets. Another thing I really love about OS2 is scripting with Rec 6. It's so damn easy. For sure you can script everything on Linux, but I do code Perl, I do like Perl. But you scare away people with Perl. So, scripting around Rec 6 is for me a vital part. I would like to support other scripting languages as well, but the main thing for me is definitely Rec 6. A thing I really noticed, which is really vital for OS2 people, is something like Dr. Dialog. There are many small little things that are really cute, and they are written in Dr. Dialog by people who wouldn't be able to code in C or C++ or anything else. So to provide a little GUI builder with Rec 6 as language is really a cool idea, and we should do something like that as well. Security in mind, I work as a network security expert, and for sure we have to think about that. That's what I told. OS2 will be completely lost with a big user base. Whatever we do, we have to think about it. Scripting is really tempting. Having microkernels where you can exchange everything is really tempting, but hell, think about security before you implement it, because otherwise it will screw you badly. And one thing which is also important, rather one good application per go instead of 1,000 little hacks. If you ever checked the applications on a Linux distro, I mean, if you can attract people with 30,000 applications, I don't know. I actually use one music player, one CD writing software, one web browser, one mail client. I rather like a good implemented one than a big choice, so we should focus on that. A really good saying from the Apache Software Foundation is this here: community is more important than code. You can lose a lot of time if you don't talk to each other. I know some developers who implemented really cool things, but they don't want to release it. Or they don't want to release it for really strange reasons. That absolutely doesn't help. It also doesn't help if you implement the same thing again. So whatever we do, we really have to organize NetLabs in a professional way. We are not professional in that regard at the moment. We have to have a core team which is really a core team and decides stuff. We have to have some kind of voting system. The core team votes about some directions, and then we implement it like this. We cannot do it the right way for everyone. People will always not like a certain way, but that's simply life. We have to focus on something, and for me it's clearly the core team who decides about that, and the core teams are the developers who contribute to code. For sure, we have to talk to the users, we need to see what they ask for, but the core teams does the decision about what should be implemented after all. I have a paper on NetLabs. It's not public because I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that. I will ask them. It's called Software Development the Apache Way. It's a Linux magazine article actually, which describes pretty well how they did that. I will try to set that up in the future. Another thing is quite clear. Everything that should be considered as core component needs to be open source. In the past we had some famous examples. One thing is the JVP tools. I'm not sure if you know them. This is actually a 32-bit command line replacement tool suite. It's really powerful, it's really well designed, but this guy absolutely refused to release the source to the public, so people simply don't use it. To quote Ulrich Möller, he said, "Why should I use a tool? I don't have the source code tool like this, I can stick with the IBM stuff." That's a fact.
What is it, by the way? JVP?
It's a complete 32 replacement for the command line API. What's the prefix of those? Yeah, Voyager, exactly. Completely rewritten 32-bit. What do we have of that if it's not open source? It's simply stupid. Even if the stuff is good. He told me he invested a lot of time and he doesn't want that to lose or something, but I'm really sorry it's lost like this. Yeah. Another thing is data transfer agent. I think it's really a cool design, but I'm really sorry. As long as I can't use that stuff in a system, as long as I can't extend it, it's not of any use, period. So every core developer agrees on netlabs.org guidelines. That means we agree on a license, we agree on a way how we document the stuff. This is really vital. Check Linux source code, you get sick of that. We have some general things like bug trackers, milestone tracking systems, and so on. I will show that later. We define the core team and the rules about how other people can join. The core team is more or less set. Those are the people who contribute to NetLabs right now. Other people can get into the core team if they prove that they are really good in doing something and they contribute on a regular basis. We provide an easy-to-use revision control and bug tracking system. I will show that later. It's called Track. It's really, really cool. And we provide a base that is required for developing. Runs in a few minutes. This is really important. It's way too difficult nowadays to get stuff to compile on OS2. There are a few notable exceptions. Dimitri showed a really cool thing with Qt. Christian does that really good with his tools. This is simply a requirement. If you have to spend a day to get your development environment to work, you won't start coding for a platform. So whatever we do in the future, this must be stupid-proof and easy that even new people can join it.
Certification program?
We provide an easy-to-use web interface for projects. You know that the NetLab pages are quite old already. I hope that Arnie and I will be able to set up his new content management system. Arne Blankert provides a really professional content management system for NetLabs, completely top of the edge of technologies, XML and so on. And I'm really looking forward to implement that together with him. This will make things much easier for people who would like to administrate web pages. Unfortunately, this depends on my spare time as well, and this is unfortunately precious, but I really know that I have to change something there. I absolutely know that. The current situation with the web page is not good. We know it. A thing which is important for me as well, it should still be possible to make money with software. Why? Almost every successful open source project is backed by commercial funding. I did quite cool projects the past months as well, for example the Qt port. this is just possible because we got asked by Norman if we could provide that for OS2, paid by them. Like this, you have really the chance to hire developers. I do that as well with a lot of my personal money so far. This is simply the way to go. If you want to have progress, you do have to hire some developers, even if this costs money. And to get a return of investment, you need to be able to make money with that. Otherwise, it gets a bit expensive for me. It is actually already. So, for me, one thing which is vital about that, GPL is not really a friendly way for making money. So, whatever we do, it most probably won't be pure GPL. We didn't have this discussion yet with the developers, but we will have to do that. A thing that is important, third parties can make profit too. It should be possible that people sell something like Object Desktop was or something like that, WPS extensions, which are commercial, binary only, that should be still possible. It works pretty well like this on macOS 10, and would like to see something like that as well. GPL people will kill me for that, but that's life. User groups. There are still user groups worldwide. In some parts of the world a bit more, in some parts a bit less. I think we should really reorganize that thing. For sure we shouldn't call it OS2 user group anymore because you scare away people. I'm really sorry about that, but that's a fact too. My goal is that we can define jobs user groups can do. One thing, for example, is that people in the user groups could take my presentation and have that in a small group at their user group. We tape this also for this reason, that people can maybe air that or show that or redo this presentation. People really have to go out to their crowd and talk about the projects. There's always one per user group who is informed about that stuff, and it should be really well organized that they distribute the news, the tasks, and so on. Like this, I can give away work as well. People can give more back. I think it would be a good idea to have something like TeamOS2 is or was. As far as I know, I was never a member of TeamOS2, but I think that stuff was really pretty well organized. And in the good old OS2 days, 10 years ago, TeamOS2 were quite successful and professional. So we should try to redo something like that, distributed all over the world. Another thing is that many people are simply not good enough in English to read the NetLab web pages. So the people in user group in Taiwan, for example, can do a presentation about something to their people in their local language. That's really an important thing. This for sure improves the community feeling and reduces the workload for the developers. And that's definitely a good thing because we can make better progress like this. In best case, we have a few contacts per user group or country or both. So I can actually delegate to a core team informations, and this team will spread that to the user group in Europe, for example, in Asia, and so on. And like this, the information really flows through the whole world in their own local languages. That would be my goal. I have no clue how we can get there. I have unfortunately way too much stuff to organize with the new projects I will show, so if any one of you, or if the user groups out there would like to step out and really open to talk about that, come to me and we will see what we can do. For sure this will take some time, but I think we should think about that. Connect to other groups in case we switch kernel and goals. I mean, if we use an existing kernel like Darwin or whatever, which should be done in my opinion, then we have to talk to those people as well. Like this you can get a bigger community because you can go into that community as well. It absolutely doesn't matter which kernel we go for, we should make sure that we talk together to those people as well. And I'm not really sure if it's a good idea. Right now we have two magazines, OS2 eSIM and OS2 Voice. I think there is something.
Yeah, when I say words, OS2
Yeah.
eSIM basically is dead. Yeah.
Okay.
Pardon?
Pardon?
Again, please.
OS2 is dead.
Let's see, okay.
We are currently in contact with the former editors,
Mm-hmm.
and the the domain has been bought from VMT Micro,
Oh, great.
including the rights. Yeah, basically the result will probably be some kind of merger, I think.
Okay, I think that's exactly the way to go. That's the reason why I wrote that here. Please do me a favor, don't spend too much money on domain names. Google resolves that problem. So. Attracting the remaining OS2 customers, it's simply a fact that people are moving away from OS2, big companies, big banks. If you do have contacts to big customers, please let me know. NetLabs is in a position that we can do basically everything for OS2. We have a good network of people. We could work together with other people. If you have anything which seems to be impossible, let me know. If the money is right, we can provide everything. That's simply a fact. So when people move away, why shouldn't we profit from that? Like this, we can invest time and money into the new project. So if you know something, let me know. They will move away anyway, sooner or later, most probably. Also, I'm still surprised that I think eComStation is not that well known in bigger environments. And this is really sad in my opinion, but it's far beyond where OS2 was. So if you know such people, contact Menzies, help them to bring ECS into companies. This will help us all together. Every one of us will profit of that. So if you have contacts, you know where the Menzies group is. They are really happy to have such feedback, I guess. So, now this part here I will probably skip because I answered most of those questions in the second part. I propose a 5 minutes break. We have to switch tape, and then I will present the vision about what we thought of the past year. What time do we have? 6. Yeah, 10 past. We continue. That's in 7 minutes. Please be in time.